Today's subject is designing and testing xAPI profiles using the xAPI profile server and DataSIM. With the ADL Initiative SETA contractors, Andy Johnson and Florian Tolk.
My name is Andy Johnson. I am the Specs and Standards Manager at the Advanced Distributed Learning Initiative. I am a SETA contractor, meaning I don't get to make government decisions, but I get to work with the government to assist them in everything they do. Florian's in the same boat. Florian's one of our lead engineers, and we're both very excited to be here and to present on both profile server and on DataSIM. We feel that these are key technologies for modernization of distributed learning systems. So wanted to break down what the topics for today are. So what we're going to talk about today are xAPI profiles and their importance. I'm going to talk about the xAPI profile server, the improvements that have been made to it since its release, best practices for using it, working groups that surround it, and then we're going to provide a demonstration of its capability. We're also going to talk about DataSIM. We're going to talk about what DataSIM is, why it's important, and a demonstration. So with the things that we are going to talk about, I want to talk about briefly things we're not going to talk about. So things we're not going to talk about today, we're not going to talk about specific business processes around creating xAPI profiles. We're not going to talk about why learning analytics are stuck. We're not going to give a lot of background on the xAPI profile server development. We're not going to give a lot of reasons why to specifically use the profile server. It's kind of hard to avoid that, but there's some. The reason I say that bullet is because it's going to be covered a lot. It's covered a lot more succinctly and well, thoroughly actually in the other topic in the other webinar. So as you can see on the bottom bullet there, if you're interested in these topics, we have previous webinars from December 2020 and January 21 that cover some of these other topics in more detail. We're going to kind of walk through today both the profile server and DataSIM from a different angle as shown. The reason that we really need xAPI profiles is essentially summed up on this table here, where we can see different authoring tool products. I've taken the names off here to protect the innocent or guilty, depending how you look at it. But we have 4 different authoring tool products and the output that they have from xAPI statements in these 4 fields. This work was done by a group that did research a couple years ago as a part of one of the xAPI learning cohorts from Torrance Learning. So I wanted to give credit there. But I would definitely look that up. I can give if anybody does want that source, I can make sure that's available after this meeting. But the idea here is that even though all of these authoring tools used xAPI, Experience API, and all of them even kind of had a head start because Experience API at one point in time did include verbs. So they already had the verbs set up for them. They chose to do things quite differently. So you can see here, if a course was completed with a test, not all of them had a score that was included. They had a different scored verb for that. Some of them don't include test questions at all. They talk about answering a question. Some of them don't answer that at all. When you talk about a course completed with no test, sometimes the course is just completed. Sometimes they go ahead and put a pass and failed on it. And even the idea of launching, sometimes the launching is included, sometimes an attempt is included. So across these 4 different products, if you were to run analytics on them and you were to put all that data in a dashboard, you would get different results because these things would look different. At one level, you might be lucky enough to see how the verbs worked, but other aspects would fail. So what we need xAPI profiles for is to make sure that data is interoperable. All right, so the solution is xAPI. I put in brackets application profiles because really when we say xAPI profiles, we're talking about how these things are applied. And the general term for that is application profiles. xAPI profiles usually function in one of 2 ways. They either function as a very detailed coding blueprint, which is probably going to be more of how we talk about it today. We have Florian, our engineer, so he's going to think about it more that way. But I did want to make sure that if you are more of a do-it-yourselfer and you use YouTube not so much to look up technical details, you think of a profile as that is something that exists to help walk you through how to implement something specific. So an xAPI profile might walk you through a specific domain or use case on how exactly to do something, and it might do so with more text, more pictures than it would than necessarily code. So both sides of that are extremely important, but today we're going to focus more on the data side. So to kind of get to how deep some of these profiles are and how deep xAPI actually is, we see here on the right what people think xAPI is. They think of actor, verb, object. You might have an identifier and a version with it. But really, it's so much deeper than that. And we're not going to talk about how deep those are today, because that's going to be talked about in context of xAPI profiles instead. When we talk about xAPI profiles, a lot of people just think of verb definitions, because that's usually where we start. We usually say, here's a list of verbs. And that's how we conceptually describe profiles. So when I talked about the do-it-yourself video and to provide instructions, that's what we think about, or what are the different things I can do? But it doesn't get us deep enough. So what we're going to talk about today more are how to get deeper on xAPI profiles. Just a brief couple things before I turn it over to Florian. The xAPI profiles are separate from the xAPI specification. That's what a profile is. It's additional rules. They promote data interoperability, as we talked about with the different products. And they really define the expected data so that you can be confident when you aggregate that data and show it, use it for analytics or show it in visualizations. So to talk in more detail about xAPI profiles, I'm going to turn it over to Florian now. Go ahead, Florian.
Thanks, Andy. As you look at the new version of a profile, you can already see that the word verb definition isn't even shown, because that is such a small part of what a profile is that it wouldn't even show up on a diagram. If I made the diagram detailed enough to show this, it wouldn't be big enough to fit on this slide. But an xAPI profile can be broken down almost as the language that you are defining for your project, where it's broken down into concepts, templates, and patterns. Concepts would actually include the verb definitions or other things, such as the type of activities that people can do within your project. So this would, for example, be a single word in a sentence. Then templates are actually full-on xAPI statements. This is how you want this specific statement to exist. So for example, for every verb or whatever type of interaction a learner would have with an object, you would define exactly how that xAPI statement would look, what it would hold, what it wouldn't be allowed to hold, and exactly where what information would exist. So this is like an xAPI statement, a full-on sentence. And then patterns are expected flows of xAPI statements. For example, if you think of the CMI5 specification, you start by launching, then initializing, then you either pass or fail the statement, and then you terminate the activity. And these come one after the other. If someone just has a bunch of completed statements, you can see either they're doing something shady or the system's broke. So this is a great way both for software engineers and for data analysts to look at this data, compare the profile, and know if something is out of whack.
Just talk about the xAPI profile specification. It is basically the blueprint for building these different schematics that Florian has described. So how do we build profiles themselves? What are the rules? So Florian showed those rules on the last slide. So that working group, the 9274.2.1 IEEE, is working to build that blueprint out. The project authorization request has already been approved, and the working group has been formed. So the idea is to take on a gamut of different activities. First, we're going to get standardized that xAPI profile specification, which has already been technically done for the last 3 years, and then we're going to take on individual profiles. And that individual profiles part is really important as we open up the pipeline to from the xAPI profile server. So, and I just want to talk very briefly before I turn it back to Florian again. Our end goal in ADL is to really look at completing 4 different data pillars for a total learning architecture profile or set of profiles. And those are going to center on learning content management, or LMSs, competencies, career states, and learning activity post-processing or evidence. So different, if you did have specific statements you want to use as evidence that might persist in your entire learner profile, things that were exemplary, course completions, things like that, that you would want to be able to share almost like a micro-credential. Those are all things that we're looking to do as a part of total learning architecture and the different profiles that are on the ADL's checklist. So as we go into the profile server discussion. This is our end goal, but there's certainly so much more to do even than this.
Okay, so I will be demoing the profile server, which is actually live right now. I'm going to wait a few seconds on this slide in case you want to grab the QR code. I'm sure Liz is going to be passing out copies of the slide deck as well if anyone just wants to grab the link here. But it is a live server that is being used by some people already. And now I'm going to steal control and share my screen with you, fine folks. Now, this is, as you can see, obviously a local version, just because when you put things on the profile server, they are there until I go in there and manually remove them. And I don't like messing with live instances just for demo purposes. It's just not a good look, in my opinion. I'll be breaking down this walk to the profile server into a number of points. First of all, I'll show you to find information in case what I talked about didn't cover everything you need. Then I'll show you about, how it is to sign up a new user and walk you through what working groups happen to be. After you have a working group, I will show you how to create one and how to actually post a profile you've already created to the profile server. After this, I'll show you how to explore profiles and then finally how to build one using the actual UI. Okay, so from the beginning, the profile server already has a couple of pages included, obviously. If you haven't built a profile before, I suggest you either check with the Getting Started page or the frequently asked questions page. Currently, the frequently asked question page is a little bit sparse because we have not been asked very many questions. So please don't be hesitant to hit up with contact numbers and ask your questions, and we will populate as things come along. In addition to what's on the profile server, as a matter of fact, in the next release, we'll be linking this page as well, is the actual ADL official profile server guide. And this is both a very technical guide for the nerds out there like myself who love looking at code, as well as a guide on what is the profile server and how to use the UI. So this is almost a written version of this quick walkthrough I'm walking through right now. So obviously you would sign in up here. You can create a new account. You don't need to cause an email or anything. You just sign in or create a new account, give an email, and you should be ready to go. At this point, you'll want to explore the working group that exists. As you can see here in this demo environment, we have two. One that I already built beforehand, and one that I don't own. If someone created a working group that you want to be part of, you can just request to join, and they will see it under their members page. And then they will just approve you or deny you. And when you create a working group, we have a number of actual steps. So first of all, you obviously give it a name, you give a short description of what it is there for, and finally, you actually want a link to where they meet. Now, this is actually kind of an important bit. If, for example, you use Teams, try to the Teams meeting invite here, or if you use, if you keep all of your chat logs via a Google Doc, link to the Google Doc or to your Google Drive where you keep all of this. This is just so that when everything is done and you've all broken up and not for the working group and someone else looks at the profiles you've created, they can still find a record of why things are the way they are. Obviously, I don't have a link to collaborate anywhere, so I'm going to close out of here. But once you actually go ahead and build it, it'll look just like this. And now you have a working group. You've already started working on a profile that is actually a JSON compliant profile. How do I get this into the server without hand jamming everything in? Fortunately, the profile server has a built-in API that allows you to import these profiles without any problem. It's quite simple. You come in, you create a key, you give it a name, and now you want to check if you have what permissions this person would have, this key would have, right? So obviously, reading means it can pull information about your working group and your project, and write means that it can post new information. And once we have this key, now this part, if technical stuff scares you, you may want to look away for a few seconds because I am now getting ready to post this information. Now, in order to post this to the API, you really only need a very basic post command with the API key as one of its headers, as well as the application JSON header. And then you can go ahead and include your JSON document. Now, this is just a very large JSON document with an array that says profiles, and in that array is all the profiles that you want to go ahead and post. And now we do the live demo, so obviously it's not going to work. Oh, no, it worked. Perfect. So now I go back to my browser. I go to my profiles page. I refresh my profiles page. And now I have a published profile that is on the public working space. And now if I actually go to public profiles, you can then see there is actually a profile available to the public that my working group had published out to everybody. And this is the point where we start getting to the more user interface heavy sections, because now we're talking about creating an actual profile from scratch. We now have a profile that we created. We have a profile that doesn't have anything into it, that hasn't been published, so no one can see it. Now you want to create a new profile for one purpose or another. At this point, just create a profile, and you can either create your own IRI or have the server generate one for you. This really is just so that the IRI kind of helps you link to more metadata if you want to, which is why the generated IRI usually links to the actual profile server. Here it obviously is localhost, but in the actual profile server, it would actually be the root profiles@usalearning.net. I will then be calling this live demo profile. And again, I will add some information about the actual profile. And this will actually show up in the actual profile spec. If you look back at the previous slide where we showed the profile is, this is part of the metadata about this profile. And if you have a multinational team, you can even add multiple language versions of this. So you can have this in German, in Spanish, in English, and then multiple people can use it in the future, and they can work across language gaps. Additionally, this would be if you are aware of the JSON LD spec scope note, this is just an additional notice by the authors of the people that most systems wouldn't care about. But if you're deep into the well, like I am, you might care a little bit. And then, of course, even multiple profiles, you can tag them with additional metadata. This is profile server specific and just helps with actual querying on the server itself. And now we have a profile that we've just created that is empty. It has nothing in it. And if you look, it's broken down into nice 3 big chunks we talked about earlier, right? We have concepts, we have templates, and we have patterns. I am now going to walk you through the concept section just because this is where we get to a very important part of what the profile server strongly encourages. We are now going to go ahead and create the verb launched. When you create any new concept, the first thing it does is it shows you the query template. So this is you searching for concepts that already exist on the profile server. So instead of you redefining the same concept multiple times, you instead reference the already existing definition, and multiple profiles don't have the exact same ground truth of what the word launched would be. So I look up launched. You need an N in launched. My apologies.
So Florian, while you're kind of sorting that out quick, I wanted to just to bring up that Florian has run a local version of the profile server, and for the most part, or at least for the most of the near future, the ADL plans on hosting a version of the profile server for everyone to share profiles. Eventually, we do expect this might be federated because people might want to protect their own. But use of the profile server can be a private thing as well, because the profiles aren't actually public unless you publish them. But the most of the point of using this is to actually share profiles. So Florian, I think you've got a result working now.
Yes. So I'm going to say the term deselected, or someone removed no longer wants to do something. At this point, I see multiple concepts here that exist. And I want to create this verb and add it. So now I click select, and then I add that to the profile. And as you can see, I have the term deselected. However, if you look, it was defined in the TLA profile, but I'm in the live demo profile. This way, in case deselected changes down the road, you can either choose to point to the legacy or point to the new definition. And while the other people are in charge of maintaining it, you can still use this information, and you no longer have the same definition written down 10 times. And this is actually a problem I see a lot of people run into when they first create a new thing on the profile server. They just build everything from scratch, which is it's not good, because it's, first of all, harming the whole intention of profiles, which is to create one language for everybody. And additionally, it is somewhat of a problem for me, because the profile server has been built not to allow people to delete things, specifically because we are meant to reference each other's work. And removing something from the database once it's been added is a little bit of a headache for me. So I ask for my personal sanity. Always look to make sure that the existing, there's not something that already exists for you. Now, once I've filled up my profile full of templates, patterns, concepts, and mapped them against existing profiles, I can then go ahead and I can publish. It is really the publish. You just click publish, use the IRI, acknowledge that this is official. And once you do this, again, it's been published. It cannot be taken back. There is no way to unpublish when it's published. It's a server that is a profile that anyone can use and anyone can see. And now it's published. And I go to the live profiles, and now you see two. You see the live demo profile, and you see the TLA profile. And I want to make note that you do not see the empty profile, which was not published. And as long as you do not publish a profile, only the people within your working group can see it. And this is a great way to keep things private. So if you want to use it to publish things, but don't want to share it with the world because your project is at a clearance level you aren't allowed to put it at, you can go ahead and keep it at that point. Additionally, once you have a profile that's actually been published, you can very easily go ahead and click on the profile, and then you can download it as a JSON document. And now you have the actual JSON document that you can put into computer systems, or you can give to nerds and make them warm and fuzzy inside as well. I do believe that was everything I planned to talk to about the profile server.
Okay, great. Florian, I will take control again then. Let's see here. So one thing I did want to quickly bring up. So Florian did use as an example security levels. And unfortunately, that example really wouldn't work because the profile server is currently on a public site. If there was anything secure, we would actually have a different internet enclave for that. But that also speaks to the value of having multiple profile servers, because if you did operate in a secure environment, you might not be able to share that one out, but you would want to share less secure profiles in. So, for example, if you had a course on something with security, or specifically something that nobody else could see, the subject matter of that course might use a profile on that domain subject, but you might still want to do basic things like launch, terminate, pass, failed, and you can pull in that from the other profile server. All right, so Florian, all that was great, great demo. But what if I want data now? I mean, it seemed like a lot of work to create profiles, and what about the data aspect of that? Because even if you did make those profiles, I want some data with that. So how can I get that?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Andy. It's almost we planned this. What if we talked about DataSIM, which is actually a really nice simulation tool that allows you to take xAPI profiles and generate years of data in a matter of minutes. It's a relatively powerful tool. It's written in Clojure, which is actually meant to create and work with tons of data at once. And it allows you to create relatively realistic simulations based off of just a small number of arguments. Andy, next slide, please. Alrighty, so DataSIM, as mentioned before, it allows you to create a bunch of xAPI data, and it's very hard to, at ADL, all of the nerds call it real fake data. It's hard to get that, and unless you have someone that wants to either hand jam it or they want to create a random data set, which is, again, useless because it's random. DataSIM takes actual templates and canvas patterns and profiles additionally with DataSIM specific arguments in order to create realistic behavior of actors within an xAPI environment. And this reduces the time for people, right? We don't need to have a bunch of individuals sitting at a computer testing everything just so we have data we can work with. We now have one person that creates 25 fake people, and then they sit at a desk for 2 years in a matter of seconds, and then you have 2 years worth of data after one person spent an afternoon building a proper simulation. Next slide, please. Perfect. So why would you want to use DataSIM? Well, first of all, DataSIM is a free open source tool, and most other realistic data generation tools aren't open source. And because DataSIM is an actual simulation, you don't need to run through the actual human testing. And any other data that you usually use to create xAPI, as mentioned previously, really is one of those dumb systems that creates noise rather than a realistic simulation. All righty, and Andy, ready for the next one, please?
Okay. Yep.
Okay, so before we jump into the demo, I'm actually going to walk through the actual theoretical concepts first, and then I'll show you DataSIM in action. So the DataSIM works with xAPI profiles, which you can use multiple profiles to work with, and it will actually make sure the profile you're building is a valid xAPI profile. This is a really good point because I've had a number of people who have never used xAPI and never used an xAPI profile before contact me in tears saying, hey, Florian, this profile that you sent me, or this survey you sent me, it doesn't work. It doesn't generate statements. All it gets all these error messages. And we walk through it in terms that they're trying to create an xAPI statement where the actor has illegal terms in it, right? For example, they're trying to put a home address into an actor section, which by default has been excluded because that is PII and that should be stored somewhere else. So profile is one of the 4 main arguments that it needs. Next one being, Andy, can you please go to the next slide? Would be the persona. This is you actually defining people. It's not a really large thing. You can break down into types of people, right? For example, you have your instructor and your learner, and then you have your overall supervisor, and you have your content creator. And all of these would be broken out into their own groups of people. Or you can just be defined as, hey, this is a person. You don't have to blend into any group, and they might do a mix of multiple things. And this is actually, if you're familiar with the xAPI spec, this is where you are defining the actor object that we were talking about way back in slide 5. And it's important, it's good to have more than one of these because otherwise you're just simulating one person doing the same thing over and over again. And the next slide, please.
Sure. So just to kind of weigh in on a kind of a cool use case you could use for this. So let's say you were looking at a bunch of students for data. You could actually define an A student, a B student, a C student, a D student, and an F student, and have different probabilities for different types of statements they might send and different things they might do. So breaking down these actors is really cool and can have some pretty interesting use cases. Here you go, Florian.
Perfect. Thank you. Alrighty, so the third section that DataSIM needs you to create is a set of alignments. Now, alignments are taking the actors and the specific roles and the specific group members and defining how they would behave. For example, a student isn't going to be assigning a task to anybody. That is very unlikely. However, a teacher is very unlikely to take a test because they've already learned everything, right? Teachers are perfect. And this allows you to both encourage and forbid specific statements. Going back to A, B, C, and D students, for example, a D student is far more likely to fail a test and less likely to launch a study activity, while an A student is more likely to pass tests, but will also be very likely to do additional activities that a D student never would because it's additional work. So getting the hang of how to create alignments really is the hardest part of people who are new to DataSIM, just because it is a definition of parameters that is unique to DataSIM. So even if you know the xAPI spec and the xAPI profile spec backwards, you still have to get used to this, what would be most likely the biggest part of your actual simulation, because you're defining every single behavior and defining exactly how likely you're to do things. And it even is put into the point where it's a double that ranges from -1 to 1, where if your behavior to do, or your chance of doing this is -1, you will never do this, while 1 meaning you will always do this if you are able to. And so the final section is parameters. This is, while it's defining the state of the world around them, it really isn't that big. It's usually a series of 4 to 5 arguments. It allows you to limit down to statements. It tells you how long the statement should go. It should tell you how you're measuring time. And finally, it allows you to actually generate a world seed. If you've played any form of games that do any form of randomization, you know that a world seed is a way to get the exact same result from a random number generator, essentially, every time. And that is so if you take a simulation and you want to move it to a new environment, you can just take the exact same simulation file the DataSIM builds for you, run it again in DataSIM and tell it to point to this new environment, and you will have the exact same result. It is just a nice way to be able to repeat an experiment. And now that we've talked about it in theory, I can actually once again share my screen, and I will show you what DataSIM looks like in the real world. Alrighty. Once again, I have DataSIM running locally in my local machine. And I have everything set up so that we now have an existing profile. So this would be a light version of the master object model, if you guys are aware of the profile that we're using, the TLA. We have a series of users on the right-hand side. We have them aligned to special behaviors, and maybe the world defined as well. So the master object model is a fully legal, fully fleshed out TLA profile. We only have one currently, but if you wanted to, you could also, for example, include the SCORM profile, and then have additional behaviors attached to the SCORM profile from the alignments page. We have 3 users explained here. And while traditionally a role is not something that you would see defined, actually make it bigger for you folks. I'm sorry about that. There we go. That's a little bit better. I know that some people's monitors aren't as big as mine. This one section is not part of the xAPI profile spec for the actor, but this is another DataSIM specific role that allows you to even further map how people act, because here these groups are more likely to act with each other than if I were to make another group. And once we have this built, we can actually look at alignments. And alignments are, I'm going to zoom out again, but alignments are the big meat and potatoes chunk I talked about earlier, where right now we just have one, where we have one single person more likely to go ahead and where he's more likely to go ahead and perform these 2 activities. He's more likely to activity A, and he's unlikely to do activity C in all of his activities. Now, alignments can map to specific activities. They can map back to specific actions in general, or they can even go ahead and map back to entering certain patterns, right? If we go back to the TMI5 example, where you launch and complete and everything, we would have a pattern that's a completed activity versus a canceled activity. And if we have a C student, he's more likely to do an activity halfway than an A student that takes studying all the way to completion. And as I mentioned before, parameters is one of the easiest things to view here. We have about half a year being taken, right? They start out the first of the year 2020, and then in October, the simulation stops. Now, I'm running on a very, very small, dinky machine. It's got about 4 gigs of RAM, so I had to kind of narrow down the amount of statements it has down to 40,000. But you could easily create hundreds of thousands of statements within minutes, provided you have a machine that has more than a nibble of RAM. So we have all of these parameters now clearly defined. And you can now, if you want to keep this, you can just export this into a giant JSON document that you can then move to different DataSIM machines and always have the exact same results. We're only working on this right now. It's just another JSON document that most people don't want to look at anyway, because JSON is not pretty for normal humans. However, we can now run DataSIM, and in a few seconds we should have a couple of JSON documents. Like I said, this is a very small machine. Normally this is much faster, but it's a small machine running both the back end and the front end, and then making API queries to itself. So it is going to be a little bit slow in this process. But while it's thinking about everything, we can actually talk about the one additional thing that DataSIM does that we haven't touched on. And that is the capability of DataSIM. Oh boy, it's really lagging. To actually generate xAPI statements and send them directly to a LRS. So actually at ADL, what we've done is we've taken part of the MOM and used that to quote unquote fake people doing activities within our TLA, and then sending these xAPI statements to an LRS, and then having the rest of the system do the rest of the work. We then credential these fake students based on these activities they pretended to have done. It is a great way to also test the pipes of a system beyond just saying, hey, how would a person act if we take everything from start to finish? Oh boy, I promise it was running yesterday when I tested a few things. So I'm not seeing any errors.
So one other thing, Florian, that it's really cool. You mentioned that you could kind of test how a system works with the data going through the pipes. It's also, and I can't, hammer this home enough, that for experiments that you want to do, and not necessarily like scientific type of experiments, but let's say you wanted to understand how course decay might work in your system. If you wanted to model that, you could effectively model course decay, put in a number of students over a number of years, and then run visualizations, reports, and everything on that data to see how it would look. So, you can really prove the value of an organizational fundamental change. Like Florian said, spending an afternoon putting this together and accurately modeling it. You might have to clearly do some upfront time to understand the parameters, but being able to make those kinds of tweaks and understand how you would actually roll something out without the fear of failure because you've already run the data is a significant cost savings.
But as you can see here now, I have 40,000 xAPI statements that me as a person would not want to look at like this. But that's where code, where scripting things come in. That's where you go ahead and automate reading all of this. Or that is the point where you want to send it directly to an LRS and have the LRS handle all of this. Now, normally this would have taken a bunch of people a whole lot of time to generate via testing, or it would have been random unordered rather than going through the CMA5 statements that we normally go through when we launch an activity. Oh, look, because I clicked the button more than once, here's another one. And it should be the exact same document. So it's actually, yeah. So this is the result that you see. It's a lot more impressive than it looks like, just because this is based off of the profile. But now I'll hand it back to you, Andy.
Okay, great. Yeah, and as Florian mentioned, you can set this up with any number of profiles. So if you wanted to see how a video profile might work, what does it look like to try to catch people cheating and watching videos? There's just so many different things you could use large amounts of data for. And if you are trying to connect this up to another product or service, it's the perfect thing for testing that. So let me share my screen again. Florian, I think you do have one more to talk through. If you can kind of talk through the QR codes that.
Oh, yes. So as I mentioned before, DataSIM is broken up into two different systems. You've got the DataSIM backend API. This is just a giant server that you can send, as we called them earlier, simulation files to. And then it will go ahead and take these giant JSON documents and then give you back an array of many, many statements. And then what I was demoing, the not quite so pretty, but much prettier than we first had it, user interface, is the DataSIM UI, which is a front end that you can actually host on your local machine and just point to the DataSIM backend. So you can break it up into multiple machines, and then have your DataSIM UI actually be used to author all of your DataSIM arguments. And then when you click run, it just sends the document up to the API. The API does its math and sends the stuff back to the UI, which then shares the information with you. And this code is all free on GitHub with plenty of documentation. But if there are any issues with DataSIM, again, it's a complex thing. Please don't hesitate to reach out. ADL will be more than happy to help.
All right, so with that, we're ready to move into Q&A. Liz, do you have any questions for us?
We had a few that were sent in ahead of time. If you're listening and you have some questions, please type them into the chat. How can you be sure that you need new activities, contacts, and result extensions in your profile?
What do you do when they're too specific for one application? So that's a great question, and I'm going to answer it a little bit broader than just the activity context and result extensions to start. So for the most part, I think we should, if you're going to use a verb differently, significantly differently, you should try to you should essentially recoin a verb. If you have a specific, I would say in that type of scenario where you might have a verb that you want to extend differently with the result context and result extension, if you expect it, it might be worth looking at a different verb for that. Now, if that information is superfluous to that verb and it's just something you want to extend, then I would. So I guess it depends on if it's part of a profile, how strict is that profile going to be? So, for example, if every single one of your statements had to tell you if you were on a submarine or not, and let's say it was for training purposes, that might be specific enough that the different identifiers you would want to use you'd want to use different ones. But if you felt that it was the same type of verb, you might want to. I'm sorry, I'm kind of waffling on that question because the answer is so much. It is so much. It depends. It's hard to answer that generically. But when they are too specific for one application, too specific. Can it be too generic for one application?
I can also, if you ask this question, you can pipe up and clarify if you'd like, if you were the asker of that question.
Yeah, or maybe, if you wanted to dive into the details offline, we could readdress that and re-answer that to the group, because it really is so much that it depends. We don't want to create a lot of new identifiers for the sake of collisions, but we do want to make sure that whenever possible, but we also don't want to make people try to fit data into places it doesn't belong. So it's really that walking that line.
Okay, and you might have already gone over this, but how can we leverage and contribute to the xAPI profile server and DataSIM? And that came from DAU.
Okay, great. Yes, please. The site was posted before. Feel free to hop in there, start creating working groups. Let us know of working groups. One thing that we do want to do is try to let people know when there are new working group opportunities forming. ADL is going to be leading some of those efforts, but at the same time, we want to get the word out for other domains that are interested in creating profiles and working together to do that, because that interoperability and shareability is the key. So yes, please use it. Please let us know when things are broken or wrong or features that you might be interested in. All these things are going to help us make the capability better.
That was it for my pre-asked questions. Does anybody else on the line, would anyone like to unmute or come on camera or say hello, ask your question?
Yeah, maybe I pose a question. Hi, Andy. I'm Baltasar Fernandez from Complutense University. We create the initial serious game profile, and we are continue to be working on that and also developing some complementary software. So, do we need to ask for authoring permit there, or what is the procedure when this is already published there?
I would say we should already have your profile in there. We'll have to figure out how to give you access to that. That's a great
exactly,
question.
no, the profile is there. The profile is there, yep. but the idea is, I mean, Ivan Martinez, his mic is not working now. He wants to continue to be the leader of the thing and to do it more collaboratively awesome. with all the people. But the thing is, how can we regain control of that?
That's a great question.
So
we might have to actually, because it's already published, we might have to figure out a way to attribute that to you. So we might have to hard code something like that to make that work. But please send me an email, and we'll make sure that can happen. And we're definitely looking forward to you guys working with us and with others to expand that profile. So thank you guys.
Yeah. Also, I have another question. Are you considering also to include some, I mean, repository about the uses of those profiles? Because in some cases, creating documentation is very, I mean, it's difficult, it's hard. But in some cases, there are some publication or some published paper where this profile is being used and could be of help for the community. Are you considering to do this kind of large, non-organized repository or something similar?
So Florian, can you talk to document repositories? Because yeah, Balthazar is right that there's a lot of documents that might be useful to store with profiles for guidance.
Mm-hmm.
So most of those documents are actually covered, they should have been covered at least by the additional ADL page that I mentioned. So that is the ADL profile server. If you go to the adlnet.gov page and look up guides, let me see if I can get the exact URL and post it in here.
So Florian, he's speaking to for a specific profile if you wanted to provide your own guidance for that profile rather than just a single working group link.
Oh, so by default, those should be by that link. As it is right now, we don't have a way to add additional links. However, that is something we are working on adding down the road. So in the future, when you create a working group or after you have a working group, you can add additional quick links and have those be additional documentation templates. But as it is right now.
Okay, thank you. That will solve the problem. Yeah, thank you.
Right. And the working group link, you might also want to use something like a GitHub or a public space for working, because while the profile server is great for these coordinated efforts to keep track of the profiles themselves and to make sure everybody can see them, it doesn't have abilities or messaging capabilities or pull requests or anything that GitHub does. And nor really will it go there. Being a government resource, there's just certain things we can't do and leave public or have the bandwidth to provide services like a GitHub might.
Yeah. And we have also a GitHub page. So, but the idea is we're figuring out how to do compatible both things, because we think that this profile server is a very, very nice initiative to have a hub for concentrating all the effort and for letting other people know what is happening in the xAPI community. Thank you very much, and great work. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Andy, we have a hand raised from Colleen. She also asked a question in the chat. Colleen, I think if you can unmute.
Thank you. It's Colleen Armstrong. I'm with the Royal Canadian Navy, and we're working on a digital framework of which xAPI is a fundamental pillar. I'm struggling with being able to set some of these things up both between secure and unsecure networks. And I was just wondering in relation to the web space aspect of how you're dealing with the JSON, is that something that can be done within a closed network? Assuming then we have to create our own xAPI server, profile server for that behind that. And if there's been any experience doing that. And also I went to sign up for the work group, but it asked for a collaboration site. So our stuff's somewhat behind firewalls. So is there another way to be able to set the working group up without having to put that info in, or something we could do that way? So thank you. And I'm very excited about what you're doing.
Really,
So, Florian, I
any
think that's
valid
you.
URL would work. Yeah, any valid URL should work. If you have, even if you just put a link to your company website, it'll make it happy. If you're aware of what a URI is, if you input a valid URI, then you have, then it can accept it and move on. And additionally, getting it to work on a, no problem. And getting it to work on a closed network, you can hope the whole profile server code is live on our GitHub as well. Let me see if I can pull that up. GitHub. And then you can just host it locally. It's unfortunately, you may need to actually create the where can I find it? You may have to create an executable if you're trying to use SSL. And if you have issues getting the code running, don't hesitate to reach out. But here's a copy of the ADL GitHub server source code. And then you can absolutely run it locally and then use it behind closed doors.
And so the one thing to also consider is at what point, if any, does it become shareable? Because if you're collaborating and then it becomes shareable, it can become part of the base profile server. But if it never, and if you need it, like Florian's talking about on your own enclave, and you're sharing with other people in that enclave, that makes sense. But just be careful that you're not going through extra steps if this isn't going to be something that's shareable or isn't going to be shareable until another point in time, because then it might be worth it to collaborate independent of the profile server and just enter that profile and publish it once it's in a state where you can share it on the public enclave, or if you roll out that other enclave, then it might make more sense to start earlier.
Yes, I was considering doing a straw man, so to speak, that would satisfy that as well, so we can do proof of concept and aligning it there. We're also looking at working with the S6000T ILS series standard and trying to create some sort of an automation relationship between the creation of the curriculum and the xAPI statements to use with development. So what you're doing here directly relates to that. So that's very cool. That's
fantastic. Thank you, Colleen.
Okay, it looks like we've got one other hand raised. Oladapo, if you could unmute. Maybe.
Okay, for me, I had trouble signing in. I came in very, very late to the party. So I don't know if there will be a recording available.
Yes.
I don't know if there will be a recording for us to.
Yes. So
yeah,
we'll,
and so
we'll
actually
post
I'm actually new to xAPI.
Thank you.
I'm new to xAPI. So where do we go for newbies?
So I would actually say start with the CMI5 working group, and I can work to get you that link.
Okay. Pardon?
I'd work with the CMI5 working group. Let me Liz, let me give you. Let me stop presenting. I'll throw that in chat quick. I gotta go find it. But I'll get that up. Liz, if you want to kind of do the IFEST stuff, I'll get that link for that gentleman.
Yeah. While Andy's getting that, I just wanted to take a second to remind everybody who's listening about IFEST. It is happening August 31st through September 2nd. And
okay, so you mean there is a link here?
Yep, he'll put it in the chat for you. This is just me reminding everyone about IFEST. And it's going to be an online conference with one in-person social networking reception. And that part is going to be very exciting. If you go to the next slide, we will be having a live in-person War on the Rocks recording. So if you want to come to that, you can socialize with everyone who will be in attendance at IFEST who wants to come to this networking reception. And you can find more information about that on our website.
It is in person, it's not virtual?
So the conference is going to be online, but the one, sorry, keep flipping back and forth here. The one in-person networking reception that's happening on the 31st of August is going to be in the Washington, D.C. metro area. We're planning for NTSA headquarters at the moment, which is in Arlington, but we will share more information about that as things progress. And all of that can be found on adlnet.gov. Okay.
So Oladipo, were you able to see the chat? And you can just email me too if you want to have a more in-depth conversation about what you're looking for, and I can be more direct on how I can provide help.
Oh, okay. That will be very. Thank you very much. I will do that. I will send you an email.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay. I think we've done all of our plugs. I've got one more to tell you all about, and that is our next webinar. Well, that will be on August 18th, and it's Pearls Transitioning New Learning Opportunities to the DoD Workforce. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to our webinars page, and you can check out more information about our next webinar there. And I think, Andy, do you have any final words to say to everyone? I think that's about it.
No, just thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for your support in all these programs.
All right. Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending today, and I hope you have a great day.